to our online speaker. Please welcome Shamil Mangildeen, head of the Bashkortostan branch of the Federative Party and the head of the committee of the Bashkir National Movement abroad.
Good day. Do you hear me? Yes, okay, thank you. So I will read my text. Dear participants of the Forum of Free Nations.
We're not hearing you. Just a second, technical issues.
But somebody showed me that they hear me. Yes, at least two persons, yes, I see that. Inna Kuruchkina.
I can hear you too, I can hear you.
Yes, okay.
Me too.
Hanna Abukanova and Jamil Krimoglu, they can hear me, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, please go ahead, thank you.
Okay. Dear participants of the Forum of Free Nations of Post-Russia, thank you for the opportunity to speak and convey my thoughts and suggestions to the entire civilized world. I want to turn to American and European politicians because I see that there is still no single and clear position on the future fate of Russia. In fact, what is usually called Russia is actually the Moscow Empire. And this Moscow Empire has always lived and still lives due to the robbery, suppression, and genocide of other peoples. Due to the occupation of the territories of other peoples, the extermination of the best people of the conquered peoples, the assimilation, Russification, and de-ethnization of the conquered peoples, and the use of the conquered peoples for their own purposes, including in their wars of conquest. This is clearly seen, including on the example of the current war of the Moscow Empire against Ukraine. Many states of Western civilization were empires in the past, but further, for many years, they have been normal, democratic, civilized states with a change of power, respect for human rights, and an adequate foreign policy. Dear representatives of Western civilization, I ask you to answer these questions. Aren't your countries tired of being in a state of Cold War for almost 100 years? Aren't you tired of investing in weapons to contain this aggressive monster called Russia? Are your governments not tired of providing assistance to countries that are constantly subjected to aggression from Russia? Ask Poland, Finland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Georgia, and many other countries what it means to be in Russia's zone of influence. What does it mean to live constantly under open attack or to live in anticipation of attack? Are you going to fence yourself off from Russia with an outer wall or a huge moat? But then it turns out that you are abandoning the indigenous colonized peoples of Northern Eurasia and leaving us at the mercy of the imperial fascist regime. Remember the collapse of the Russian Empire, when the Triple Entente countries abandoned further plans to eliminate the Bolshevik regime and withdrew their troops from Russia. What did you get in the end? The creation of a monster called the Soviet Union, the spread of communist ideology around the world, and as a result of today's communist China, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba. How much effort and resources did it take you to restrain and resist their aggression? But if you had brought the matter to the end then, perhaps now the world would be completely different. For 70 years of Soviet power and 30 years of Yeltsin Putin's power, the people of Russia have been so fed up with malice and hatred for everything American and European that a huge number of Russians simply hate you. They hate the whole civilized world, all the countries of Western civilization. Today, an ideology of misanthropy called Russism has been formed. It is not much different from fascism. It just has not yet matured to the killing of millions of people. But this ideology is progressing fast. In Russia, those who are against the war with Ukraine are openly persecuted. Outright Nazism and racism reign in the country. In the national republics, the fascist Putin state is doing its best to destroy the languages of the indigenous peoples of Northern Eurasia, falsify our history, and cover up the crimes of the Moscow Empire against us, the indigenous colonized peoples of Northern Eurasia. By no means do I want to say that all ethnic Russians and citizens of Russia are Nazis. No, not at all. But lots of ethnic Russians in Russia are sick with chauvinism and rage about the mission of a special path, so-called Ruski Mir, Russian world, and the ideology of the Russian world. These people are sick and need to be treated. For many of them, Putin is the leader of a sect, and they are obedient sectarians. Remember what happened to the Germans after the death of Hitler. It took several decades for the ideology of Nazism to leave the mass consequences of most Germans. Similarly, unfortunately, Russian Nazism will not disappear immediately after Putin's death. And this fact must also be taken into account. Today, you are negotiating with the Russian liberal opposition, the so-called good Russians, making a big bet on them. But not a single so-called good Russian, whether it be Navalny or Khodorkovsky or anyone else, even if he can come to power, will be able to manage the Russian people sick with Nazism and the delirium of the Russian world, since the majority of Russians hate liberals. Not a single liberal will be able to change the ideology of Russism in the minds of these people. For such change, there must be a change of generations, as was in the case in Germany after its loss in the Second World War. There are risks that, having replaced Putin, the liberals, under the influence of the Russian masses, will themselves be reborn into Putin #2. Russians want to be ruled by a tyrann and preferably with a hard hand. They want to have an empire and extend their imperial power to other nations, to those whom they have already enslaved. They also want to return under their power those who were able to get out of this empire. So they are now trying to return Ukraine, and only the heroic resistance of the Ukrainian people does not allow this. Today, Russia is very actively forming an alliance of dictatorships from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Belarus, and Syria, which in the event of such a military political alliance threatens all of humanity. Therefore, Russia in its current form must cease to exist, and the state-forming Russian people inhabiting it must go through separation and repentance. There must be an inevitable lustration. On the territory of Northern Eurasia, several dozen states should be formed, which in alliance and with the support of other countries of Western civilization will be able to join the family of democratic nations, become part of Western civilization. All the colonized peoples of Northern Eurasia must receive freedom and independence. This is the only way to get rid of the global threat called Russia forever. The civilized democratic world must take responsibility for the salvation of mankind. Otherwise, we are all waiting for the Third World War and world crisis and world chaos. Also, taking this opportunity, I want to express gratitude to the people of the United States on behalf of the Bashkir or Bashkort nation. This gratitude for the events that took place 100 years ago, when the Congress and the US government provided assistance to the starving population of the Volga region and the southern Urals. Then the Russian government, led by the Bolsheviks in 1921, 1922, staged an artificial famine, the genocide of the Bashkir people, as a result of which the Bashkir people lost, according to various estimates, about half of their numbers. 50% of our numbers we lost due to this artificial famine. Let this gratitude on behalf of our people sound here, even after 100 years. But we remember Herbert Clark Hoover and Walter Lincoln Bell and the American Relief Administration, ARA, through which many of our ancestors survived. I hope that in the near future, the American Congress, at our appeal, which will certainly be, will also recognize the events of those years as the genocide of the Bashkir people, just as the United States recently recognized the famine of Ukrainians. With this historical reference, I also want to indicate that the evil that Russia is doing in Ukraine is not a momentary horror that descended on the leadership of Russia today or in 2014. No, this empire has been engaged in the destruction of neighboring and conquered peoples for centuries, only from time to time changing methods from one to another. Sometimes these methods are horrendous, burning villages with their inhabitants, as it was in the case of the Bashkir village of Siantus in 1736, or direct destruction by executions in firing ranges, exile in prisons, and hard labor, forced relocation of entire peoples, the execution of the Bashkir government by Stalin in 1938. Sometimes the methods change. For example, the Russification of education, the elimination of nationality column in passports, and gradual assimilation, the raider says by Putin's people of Bashkir enterprises and companies, for example, the Bashneft company, and the dismissal of Bashkirs from highly paid positions. My Bashkir people survived all these methods of destruction and is in fact an example of a tragedy little known in the world, of a nation that once inhabited the Volga region and the Urals, and today is on the verge of complete annihilation and dissolution. However, on the territory of Northern Eurasia, there are dozens of other peoples who are in a more tragic situation than Bashkirs. Only independence from this Moscow empire can save us from this fate. All other ways, such as autonomies, republics within the Russian Federation, do not lead to anything good. And we have seen all this from our own experience before. We want independence, and this is our natural desire as opposed to the destruction of our nation. We want to become new democratic states, countries of Western civilization as Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and others have become in their time. And in the future, there will be Bashkortostan, Tatarstan, Udmurtia, Mari El, Chuvasha, Erzan Master, the Ural republics, the Siberian Republic, the Far Eastern Republic, Ingermanland, and a number of other republics of Northern Eurasia currently controlled by the Putin's fascist state. Thank you for your attention. Committee of the Bashkir National Movement Abroad. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is going to be also online.